Hi, I'm Andrew Rodriguez, and welcome to PsychoBible. This is going to be a little bit of a unique video for me because I don't typically talk about really trending topics. But I did watch the Netflix documentary Tiger King. And this will actually be a two-part video because there were a couple documentaries on Netflix that I watched that really stood out to me. And the most interesting aspects of both of these were their portrayals of sexuality. And if you watch my channel, you know that's one of my main areas of interest. Well, with Tiger King, it just became a phenomenon. Everyone is watching this documentary, and because the characters, or the individuals in this documentary are such characters. But I really want to focus this video on the portrayal of sexuality in Tiger King. See, with Tiger King, we get a sampling of all forms of sexual deviancy, and it really is a sampling of what's going on in our culture in a broader context. It's a real case study of the flood of abuse of our sexuality that comes the more we erode our ties to normative sexuality based on natural law and the sanctity of marriage. The stories of the cast are tragic and sadly illustrate the consequences of humanity's damaging of the image of God expressed in our sexuality. There are a variety of characters in Tiger King, but the main focus is on Joe Schriebvogel, later last name Maldonado, and then Maldonado Passage, but he's better known as Joe Exotic, who founded and directed the GW Zoo in Wynwood, Oklahoma. Now, he is a gun-toting, gay, country music singing drug addict. And when I say country music singing, when I heard them play recordings of his music videos, I was like, what? Like, that was probably the craziest part. There's some crazy stuff in this documentary, but that was probably the part that I found it crazy, so it just blew my mind. Like, that's his voice, and I hate country music. Like, I can't stand most male country music artists. I don't understand how they consider that talented singing. But I can hear him and listen and be like, he's actually got a good voice. His talking voice is awful, but it sounds nothing like his singing voice. So that just blew me away. But he's just such a character. Like, he really is a conundrum. There's some aspects of him that are very flamboyant, and other parts that seem just like a regular redneck. He does not fit any sort of gay stereotype. At least not in those aspects. Now, at one point, he's married to two men simultaneously. Now, I don't know how it's possible. Polygamy is not legal, at least not yet. But they show some sort of marriage certificate. I don't know if it's just symbolic in some way. But you see, right there, with the main character in this, or the main figure of this documentary, just already some alternative sexual lifestyle going on right there. Then there's Carole Baskin, Joe's rival from Big Cat Rescue in Tampa, Florida. The audience reaction has not been too good to her, even though she was the alleged target of an assassination conspiracy. But there's a lot of circumstantial evidence that she might have killed her second husband, Don Lewis. So there's a character with a shady past, and most people watching it, just their alarms are going off. We also learn about Doc Antal from Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. He actually calls himself Bhagavan, which is a Hindu term, which means Lord, or a friend of God. So this guy has a major God complex. He has multiple wives, at least three, or wives or girlfriends, whatever. His zoo is basically run like a cult. If the young female interns want to be enlightened, he presents himself as a guru. So if they want to be enlightened, they enter his harem. He changes their names. He gets them breast implants. He isolates them from their families. They work there 24/7 pretty much. They can't take holidays off or visit their families. So you're committing to this. They're free to leave anytime. But as one lady said, who left, they're stuck there, held down by dozens of social ties, just as any other cult. So there's quite a character with his display of being just patriarchal running of this zoo, and his massive ego, and being indulged by multiple women. We also meet Jeff Lowe from Vegas. He comes to help bail Joe out of debt from his lawsuit with Carole. And Jeff and his young wife Lauren are swingers. Now, there's a huge age difference, clearly, between Jeff and his wife. And so, how is he able to get all these women? Well, he uses tiger cubs. He entices women by having them go up into hotel suites. He sneaks in tiger cubs. Women will do anything certain women will do anything if it means getting to play with the tiger cub and cuddle with it. And so they will gratify his sexual fantasies, makes him feel like he's on top of the world, and he just has no shame about it at all. And his wife goes along with it, apparently willingly, apparently excitedly, but who knows? We don't learn too much about him. So, what does the sexuality of all these characters have in common? I think, based on what we learned from those we most get to know, that what they have in common is trauma and addiction. Those seem to be the big factors that can influence one to diverge radically from sexual integrity. Some of these people started off in a state of sexual integrity, as you hear stories about their lives, but went down these paths of just sexual insanity. For example, there's Carole. Now, she grew up in this super fundamentalist, so-called Christian home. So fundamentalist and legalistic that when she was raped by 3 men at age 14, her family blamed her. They assumed she must have been, for something like that to happen to a girl, they assumed she must have been asking for it. And this is just tragic. They misrepresented Christ through, likely they misrepresented Christ throughout her entire childhood. If this is how they responded to a rape, I can only imagine what sort of legalism she grew up under her whole life. So when faced with a traumatic violation of her dignity and sexuality, she was not met with God's heart of compassion and comfort, restoring her dignity and identity. No, she was greeted with shame. So, of course, she's going to leave her family. She leaves home at age 15. At age 17, she marries a man who turns out being extremely abusive. And so then she's in this miserable marriage. And at age 20, she's walking down the road and she meets Don, this guy who's way older than her, and he's wealthy, but he's struggling in his own marriage. And so you just see a chain of pain and unhealthy self-medication through relationships. A few years later, she leaves her abusive husband, gets together with Don. That marriage doesn't go so well, and that's the one that there's a lot of suspicion about her killing off Don. But it's through a relationship with Don that she gets involved with Big Cat, and eventually she tries to form an animal sanctuary for cats that she rescues from breeders and poachers, things like that. But there's some aspects of her that make it seem like she's really not that much different from Doc Antal and Joe Exotic. So she doesn't get a whole lot of love from the audience once they see more how she may be a bit hypocritical. But anyway, obviously the most fascinating of all the characters is Joe Exotic. We don't learn that much about his early years. He was born in 1964, and he said that at age 13 he knew he was gay. And this is what Joe said happened when his dad found out. He had him shake his hand in front of his mother and promise that he would not go to his funeral, whenever that would be. I don't think that meant that his dad was dying at that moment. But that gives me the impression that dad was not the salient father figure that boys need for identification with the masculine, which is so important for their development into heterosexuality. As Nicolosi explains, for a father to be a salient figure, he needs to be viewed by the child as both strong and benevolent. Oftentimes, for guys with same-sex attraction, they experience their fathers as strong, which may be manifested as violent or powerful, domineering, intimidating, or just stoic, but not benevolent, not kind, caring, nurturing, or fun. So with the strength, especially if that strength is intimidating, but not the benevolence, it creates a conflict within the boy. He knows he needs to connect with the male figure in his life. That's his gateway into the world of men. But if he's not viewed as welcoming and safe, he'll retreat. And what the response that they have, they develop this defensive detachment that keeps them from being hurt by dad. So they defensively will detach from their fathers. In order, it's a survival technique. It's unconscious. So with Joe, his father's response gives us a clue of what his father was like in general, not just in reaction to his son's sexuality. See, when you hear these stories in the gay community, they often act like, well, my dad was fine until I told him I was gay, and they just act like dad's rejecting reaction to their sexuality is unrelated to the formation of their sexuality, as if they just always were gay, and it was not influenced in any way by the trait that their dad just demonstrated that they must have grown up with. But when you understand family systems, you understand how important the nurture from both parents are. That's going to majorly impact your development and the ways you feel about yourself and the type of people you're drawn to. We understand this when it comes to females. When we see girls going from guy to guy to guy to guy, we quickly say, oh, she's got daddy issues. But we turn our brains off when it comes to homosexuality. It's like, oh, what we would normally conclude when we see this among girls, but we see among guys going after guys, our instincts would tell us, maybe he has a daddy issue. But our culture tells us, no, how dare you say that? So we're not allowed to think what is quite normal for us to conclude. So after coming out and experiencing more rejection from his father, Joe describes falling into depression for the rest of his adolescence. And one night, he drives his car off a bridge, and he ends up breaking his back. Some reason he goes to Florida for his recovery, from Oklahoma to Florida, and he spends months recuperating. He happens to live next to a guy who runs a safari, bringing back exotic animals, and that's what introduces him to the world of big cats. And that seems to be his antidote to his depression, to it becomes what he lives for. So it becomes like his big obsession. Now, even with what is, to me, a very clear example of a rejecting, shaming relationship with his father, Joe's choice in sexual partners provides a possible additional clue about another contributor to his homosexuality. So I would say the dynamic with his dad, combined with also what may be an enmeshed relationship with his mom. You see later footage that shows he's really close with his mom, even going so far as getting his mom embroiled in a lot of his legal trouble because she would do anything for him. So that fits the triadic relationship, the rejecting distant father, detached father, and the over-involved enmeshed mother, and the sensitive boy. So already he fits the psychodynamic concept for development of same-sex attraction in boys. But there may be some additional factors, and I think there's some clues there in his choice of sexual partners. See, when Joe was 39, he meets John Finlay, who just graduated high school. He was 19. And he ends up with Joe for years. And he's his first husband. I'm not sure how official that was. Down in Oklahoma, I doubt they legalized gay marriage before 2015. So I'm not sure what type of marriage that was, but he was considered his first husband, and he's with him for years. Then, later on, Joe meets Travis Maldonado. Joe is 51. Travis is 19. Joe seduces Travis, even though Travis originally told him he was straight. Similarly, so was John. Later in the documentary, we hear from John that throughout all of high school and junior high, he was dating girls. And he had never been with any guys, or at least he doesn't confess to having any same-sex attraction. But he describes himself as perfectly straight until he meets Joe. Travis says he was straight. Then he meets Joe. And he ends up seducing these young men. So, Joe proposes that all three of them wed. John said he was okay with it because Joe had been trying for years to include other partners. This is one of the dirty little secrets of the gay community. Their committed relationships are rarely monogamous, at least in the long term. I remember one stat was the monogamy often ends by year 2. So, and this is in a lot of your gay marriages. So eventually it's revealed that John had been sleeping with the female receptionist Amber. This is like Jerry Springer stuff going on in this show. He leaves Joe, who comes to admit that he fell in love with 2 straight men. What are you going to do? He's just sort of like he just couldn't help himself. He fell in love with 2 straight guys. And then what later happens, Travis, who just is strung out on drugs and is just dissatisfied, restless, has no meaning in his life, shoots himself, kills himself. And just 2 months later, after losing his second husband, Joe meets a new guy, another young guy, probably was 19 as well. I forget what his age was if they said it, but this dude looked young. Meets and then pretty much immediately proposes and marries him within just 2 months after Travis dying. And so he marries Dylan Passage. Even invites Travis's mom to the wedding. It was a small wedding, just a few of them. That's bizarre. So why were John and Travis with Joe if they were both actually straight? That's how you would ask that question if you do not understand the fluidity of sexual attraction. Average people view sexual orientation as compartments. That you're either straight, gay, or bi. And you're in these really strictly defined boxes, and it's just simply you are one or the other. And you come to discover which one you are. It's just what you are. Now, this is born out of the born gay myth. There's no evidence of homosexuality as inborn. Every theory for this model has been debunked. And like the reality is, as Lisa Diamond's research continues to show, we can't keep saying born that way. And in reality is, sexual attraction is a variable subject to change based on various factors. We're still figuring out what those factors are. At least the secular world is. Those of us who've been working with people with unwanted same-sex attraction, we are a little more in tune with what those factors are because we haven't been drinking the Kool-Aid of born gay cannot change. We've known for years how sexual attraction is subject to change. Now, I don't want to say that in such a way that you think that all forms of sexual attraction are totally unstable and constantly in flux. The reality is, what the researchers don't really want to say, but the reality is the most stable sexual attraction is heterosexuality. The least stable is homosexuality, especially exclusive homosexuality, is the least stable of all the attractions. And on top of it, each of Joe's lovers were still very impressionable. We know that throughout adolescence, sexual identity can change, and oftentimes by early adulthood, teenagers might have identified as homosexual or even bisexual. By young adulthood, they arrive at a heterosexual identity. Now, does that mean they don't have any more same-sex attraction? I don't know. Most of the research in the past has been on identity, how they would identify. But there may still be some degree of same-sex attraction. On top of that, both John and Travis, I don't know about Dylan, but John and Travis were addicted to drugs. We see they were meth heads. John straight up says he was addicted to meth. It ruined his teeth. He says it ruined his brain. And it's so sad the way he describes it in one of the later episodes, how he's like, I still think my brain is messed up. So when you're in addiction, that substance or whatever that thing is you're addicted to, it doesn't just have to be a substance. It could be a behavior like gambling or sex. That addiction takes primacy in your value hierarchy. That becomes the most important thing to you. Everything else, as long as everything else actually shifts toward serving that addiction. So, if the drugs are primary for John and Travis, and their gateway to getting drugs is Joe, they will change even their sexual lifestyle if that's what they need to do to secure access to their drugs. Joe knew that the way to their affection was through providing substances. Substances as well as other novelties, and in a way, the tigers, the big cats. Everyone who's interacted with these cats described it as addicting. That being with these animals gives you a sense of power and a connection with nature and a thrill. There were people who even said that they did things for Joe. One guy who had repaired one of his buildings for just a fraction of what it would have cost. He said, I did it for $8,000. It would have cost $120,000. Why? Because I got to pet cats that no one has a right to pet. So there's something empowering about this. So you combine that with all the guns they get to shoot and the explosives they played with, the trucks. Joe would lavish John with trucks. That is feeding an addiction. They'll do anything to maintain that until it's not enough, until the well dries up. And so eventually you see John being unfaithful and going back to his preferred sexual orientation or direction. Now for Travis, there's this moment in the documentary when Joe was describing the time he met Travis. When Joe met him, he asked, "How straight are you?" And Travis says, "Pretty straight." So Joe goes, "You watch porn?" And Travis says, "Yeah." And Joe's like, "Well, do you enjoy watching the guy with the little one doing her or the guy with the big one doing her?" And Travis is like, "Well, the big one." And so Joe's like, "Well, you ain't that straight, are you?" And this interaction illustrates a couple things. At the 2019 Alliance for Therapeutic Choice and Scientific Integrity Conference, Monica Bro presented on factors causing sexual appetite formation. Viewing heterosexual pornography can have an unintended conditioning effect. You wouldn't expect this. But men are conditioned to be aroused by something he sees seconds before climax. So if he's watching straight porn, this can influence his orgasm by changing what he sees while climaxing. So if he's watching the pornography and he's watching the male actor for cues of arousal and climax. This influences a fixation upon the male and his genitalia while the viewer is having an orgasm. So he goes in watching the heterosexual pornography. He normally is attracted to females, and I've seen this actually with one of my clients as well, so addicted to pornography, finding himself more sexually fluid toward homosexuality, partly as a consequence of all his porn use and some other behaviors that he got involved with. So he found himself in a situation where he's like, now, normally I'm not attracted to guys, but every now and then I just get the desire to have sex with guys. So it comes up, it would fluctuate a little bit. It's like Pavlov's dog. The condition was made there so that the dog wasn't just attracted to the food, but the bell that would ring prior to the food. And so the dog would start salivating just at the ring of the bell. In the same way, as we're watching the male for cues of his orgasm, we're getting orgasm and arousal not just at seeing the woman, but now at seeing the guy in his genitalia. So prolonged exposure to and engagement in pornography can have that effect potentially. Now, I mean, Scripture talks about this to an extent in Romans 1, that as we deny God, we deny God's natural law, will forsake what is natural and become inflamed with lust for what is unnatural. Now, that could be, guys who are normally heterosexual now becoming attracted to homosexuality. But that's just true in general with homosexuality. When you understand that it is not normative, it is not following the design of our sexual parts. So that is the unnatural. I'm going to get so much hate for this video. Well, good thing I'm not monetized. We also see how predatory Joe is in his mate selection. He selects young, down and out, addicted, vulnerable, barely legal men. He's at least twice their age. He's 39 when he meets John, 51 when he meets Travis. I don't know, he's like 60 maybe? I don't know. Maybe late 50s when he meets Dylan. Travis said he had no life prior to Joe. We see his mom, we don't see his dad, so I'm assuming his dad wasn't in his life, or at least they didn't have a good connection with his dad. He's a drug addict. He's had really nothing going for him. He spent most of the time at the zoo not even working, but playing video games, shooting guns, and doing marijuana and other drugs. John described Joe as very controlling, lavishing him with trucks and guns to keep him connected. And Joe knew that if John left him for a girl, he couldn't compete with that. So, you see, he could not keep these guys' attention, couldn't keep them satisfied in some way, and so it just really spells out how he worked so hard to keep them locked down. And the age difference between Joe and his partners is a big sign. It indicates his own arrested development, and it might be a hint that Joe himself was initiated into the gay community by an older male when he was just a boy. We don't know, this wasn't revealed, but I suspect that this might have happened. He could very well be replaying his own experience. This is another dirty little secret of the gay community. It is far too common to hear stories of guys with same-sex attraction having childhood or early adolescent sexual experiences with an older teen or a grown adult. This trend is nearly celebrated in pride parades and Hollywood movies. They just come dangerously close to endorsing it. Think of like the recent movie Call Me By Your Name. This trend betrays the likely reality that men who engage in homosexuality struggle with adequacy related to their peers as equals. They've grown up with unvalidated self-images. Their masculinity has not been called forth and confirmed in the world of men, primarily through their fathers. And so all the brokenness of of men with same-sex attraction is on full display in this documentary. Whether that was the intent or not, I highly doubt it was. I'll give the filmmaker, Eric Good, credit for this. He presents the lifestyles of the cast without much of an agenda, if any agenda at all. For the most part, their behavior, their perversion is on full display. They're presented plainly, perhaps too plainly, sometimes humorously. Sometimes I worry that such a straightforward and sometimes humorous portrayal of such shameful behavior could serve to mainstream these behaviors and relationships. Not just the homosexuality, but the polygamy, the polyamory. It's just growing more popular. So we're seeing ourselves as a society, as humanity, growing further into sexual deviancy. But not just mainstreaming of the sexual lifestyles, but even mainstreaming of the criminal behavior. All these people in this documentary were doing some very shady things. And at other times, the documentary presented the choices and the lives of the cast, just shown them tragically. And that's the greatest reality. And I hope people are able to make that connection. They're able to see the brokenness in these lives and see this as a cautionary tale and not just a joke, not just something to make a meme out of. But this really is a sampling of it's the smorgasbord of sexual deviancy that's available now in our culture and growing more popular. And so I hope we will see this as a warning of where our society is going, and also what may have led to these outcomes in the lives of these people, the trauma, the addiction. So anyway, if I gave you something to think about, please join me in the comment section. Even if you disagree with me, I don't care. I won't delete your comment. Please like, comment, subscribe. I'm not going to get a whole lot of popularity on YouTube. And hit that bell so you can get notified when I release a video. Alright. Next documentary I'll be talking about will be the Aaron Hernandez one. So that one's a bit more serious. So join me soon for that one. Alright. God bless.